As part of showing my support for Movember, this episode is all about the moustache and the British Army. Before we begin, please don't forget to follow me on Twitter, as for the entire month I'll be posting pictures of some fabulous examples of fighting facial hair throughout military history and charting my own Movember progress. I've made a donation to the charity and would love it if you might consider donating as well if you can. Links are in the description of this video. This November, grow a mo and save a bro. The story of facial hair in the British Armed Forces dates back to the mid-1800s, as the army and navies of Queen Victoria helped to expand her ever-growing empire. Troops stationed in India and Asia adopted the facial hair stylings of the locals, who believed wearing the facial fuzz was a sign of prestige and masculinity. During the 3 years of fighting the Crimean War from 1853 to 1856, British Army troops fighting the Russians were subject to some extremely cold winters and were therefore allowed to go without shaving at all, in a bid to give themselves added protection from the bitter temperatures. Upon seeing soldiers return home in 1856, Queen Victoria wrote, "They were the picture of real fighting men. They had all their long beards and were heavily laden with large knapsacks." The popularity of facial hair skyrocketed after the end of the Crimean War. It became the done thing to sport various combinations of beards, sideburns and moustaches. In 1860, the King's regulations were updated to reflect this new craze. The chin and the underlip will be shaved, but not the upper lip. Whiskers, if worn, will be of moderate length. During the Battle of Rorke's Drift on the 22nd to the 23rd of January 1879, Lieutenant John Chadd and Lieutenant Gonville Bromhead were both awarded the Victoria Cross for their leadership during the battle against overwhelming Zulu forces, and they did it while sporting two outstanding moustaches. The two heroic officers are depicted here in the painting The Defence of Rorke's Drift by Lady Butler. Chadd is pointing out something to Bromhead in the middle of the painting. Their award citation read, "If it had not been for the fine example and excellent behaviour of these two officers under the most trying circumstances, the defence of Rorke's Drift post would not have been conducted." Facial hair continued to be popular within the military throughout the Victorian period, serving bravely throughout all of Victoria's campaigns. But by the outbreak of the First World War in 1914, the war-weary whiskers were under threat from within. After 2 years of sitting proudly upon Tommy's lips from the trenches of Ypres and the Somme to the scorching heat of the Dardanelles, on the 8th of October 1916, the King's regulations were amended, allowing men to choose between keeping or shaving off the battling bristles, and the moustache's days on the front line seemed to be numbered. But who could have had the gall to change the King's regs, I hear you cry? The blame lands at the hands of Adjutant General to the forces in 1916, Sir Neville Macready. In his memoirs, Annals of an Active Life, he explained his reasoning for the changes. In the summer of 1916, a case was brought to my notice of a wretched officer of the new army who had been court-martialed for being clean-shaven. In his defence, he made the ingenious excuse that by profession he was an actor, and that if he grew a moustache it would spoil his upper lip and militate against his successes when he returned to the stage after the war. I therefore drew upon the former papers on moustaches from the registry and asked my colleagues of the Army Council if they had any views on the subject, to which they apparently were quite indifferent, and finally obtained the approval of His Majesty the King. On the 8th of October 1916, the order allowing all ranks to grow or not to grow moustaches according to their fancy was signed. I dropped into a barber shop and set the example that evening, as I was only too glad to be rid of the unsightly bristles to which I had for many years been condemned by obedience to regulations. Shame, as I thought it a cracking tash. However, many British troops kept their moustaches despite the rule changes. The famous "Your Country Needs You" recruitment poster featuring Lord Kitchener is one of the most enduring pieces of propaganda from the war. Other terrific upholstery from the Great War include General Douglas Haig's unkempt attempt and the Kaiser's own upturned lip ferret. Good efforts all round, chaps. When the Second World War was declared, even our own bristled brummie Neville Chamberlain sported a top lip warmer when he addressed the nation delivering the declaration of war in 1939.
This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note stating that unless we heard from them by 11 o'clock that they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland, a state of war would exist between us.
Moustaches were still not uncommon, and they were still in fashion on the home front, with film stars such as David Niven sporting a much more reserved, but no less dashing, pencil moustache. The plucky push broom yet again showed its mettle in the face of adversity once more, serving with distinction throughout the conflict. Sitting atop the lips of courageous men wherever the war was fought. One that deserves singling out was worn by Lieutenant Christopher Furness during the Battle of Arras in May 1940. Aged just 28 and serving in the Welsh Guards in command of a Bren gun carrier platoon, upon attempting to cover the withdrawal of a motorised transport section, they were heavily attacked in the town of Arras. Furness, already wounded from a day's heavy fighting, pressed home a counterattack against German anti-tank guns and entrenched positions with his carriers and a section of light tanks. They were immediately met with ferocious fire from the German positions. Furness's mentions in dispatches further explains his gallant actions. The light tanks were put out of action, but Lieutenant Furness continued to advance. He reached the enemy position and circled it several times at close range, inflicting heavy losses. All 3 carriers were hit and most of the crews were killed or wounded. His own carrier was disabled and the driver and Bren gunner killed. He then engaged the enemy in personal hand-to-hand combat until he was killed. Furness was awarded his VC posthumously in 1946 and is commemorated on the Dunkirk Memorial. Some other famous 40s push brooms include Field Marshal Montgomery's Silver Fox approach, Stalin's sizable Soviet lip ferret, and who could forget Hitler's own unique interpretation on face fuzz fashion. Safe to say, it didn't catch on, much like National Socialism. But what about the modern ruling on the wearing of whiskers? The current Queen's regulations state, the hair on the head is to be kept well cut and trimmed, except where authority has been granted otherwise on religious grounds. Style and colour, if not natural, is not to be of an exaggerated nature. If a moustache is worn, it is to be trimmed and not below the line of the lower lip. So there you have it. The plucky moustache still survives in the ranks of the British Army today. It may not be as stylish as it once was, but as far as facial hair goes, it's been campaigning since the Crimea, survived 2 world wars, and weathered the scorching heat of the Middle East and beyond. Wherever the British Army has been, there's a chance that a proud push broom has stood atop the lips of the Army's best. Thanks for watching. As always, I hope you found this video interesting. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. And remember, this November, grow a mo, save a bro.